Good evening, history lovers. This is Mark Malloy with Emerging Revolutionary War. Very pleased tonight to have a special guest join us, Patrick Hannum, to talk about what we're approaching, the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Great Bridge. This small action, which occurred down in Southeast Virginia, often overlooked, but was part of a pretty significant campaign in the early part of the Revolutionary War. That a lot of people don't know how all the details, how interesting and significant it was, and that there are aspects of the battlefield today that people can go visit. And as we approach the 250th anniversary, there's going to be different tours and events and all sorts of things to mark this event. But to kind of put this Revolutionary War battle in context, to kind of get into some of the details of what happened in December 1775. We brought on Patrick Hannum, who's written extensively about this campaign and has a really interesting perspective to bring. So I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce a little bit of himself to you all and his background and how he got into this often overlooked part of Revolutionary War history. So, Patrick, thank you for coming on and joining us here at Emerging Revolutionary War.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for inviting me. And yeah, this is exciting. This is an exciting time right now. 1775 was a really important part of the revolution in Virginia. And a little bit about my background. I worked for the Department of Defense for 45 years, 29 years as an active duty U.S. Marine, and 16 years as a civilian professor at the Joint Forces Staff College, National Defense University, located in Norfolk. We teach the operational level warfare there. And one of the topics we teach is campaigning. And of course, that's the way my brain looks at things in terms of a campaign. So Great Bridge is a battle, but it doesn't make any sense unless you put it in the context of the campaign. And so I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution based on the service of my fifth great grandfather, James Hannum, in the Pennsylvania militia, and so I'm also an officer in the Norfolk chapter of the Sons of the American Revolution, and a member of the Great Bridge Battlefield Waterways and History Foundation. And I'm currently serving a 3-year assignment with the City of Virginia Beach with the VA 250 committee. So we're actively involved in a lot of these things. So this is my happy place, and talking about the revolution, and especially in 1775. So to put that in context, of course, everybody knows about Lexington and Concord, but Colonel Woodford, who would later become a general officer and die in service to his country as a prisoner of war at Charleston, he was the commander at Great Bridge. And Woodford was known by George Washington, and he was known to be a pretty competent individual. And when the Virginia convention and they voted on the individuals that would command the two regular regiments that they created, the 1st and 2nd Virginia, Patrick Henry came to command the 1st Virginia. William Woodford commanded the 2nd. And when it came to select an individual to cross the James River and attack Dunmore, they didn't pick Henry. And I think it disturbed Henry a little bit. And they had a rough relationship for a while. Henry would eventually resign in March of 1776. But in June, they would select him as Virginia's first governor, and probably the role he was better suited for. But Woodford was better suited to lead this operation south of the James River. I think he was a good choice. At any rate, Virginia created 2 regular regiments, and they created 16 minute battalions of 500 men each. Those 16 battalions would then be really, I guess the best way to describe them is militia on steroids, because they would serve an active period. They would sign up for 1 year's service, but they wouldn't necessarily be called. It's kind of like joining the National Guard and being told, well, we don't know when you're going to go on active duty or when you're going to get off, but welcome to the Guard. And so
Mhm.
that's what the minute battalions were. They were marginally successful. The only uh, the only district of the 16 that created and fielded a 10 company battalion of the 500 men was the Culpeper Battalion. And that's why they become important in this Great Bridge campaign. So Woodford is assigned to command the 2nd Virginia. And events in that fall period are pretty dynamic. We won't go into a lot of them, but Dunmore was not a static guy who just stayed in place. He was trying to create a military force that could counter this organization that the Patriots were creating. He called on commanders in chief, both the Army, the British Army, and the Navy in North America to send him forces. He did get elements of the 14th Regiment of Foot, which were then in St. Augustine, Florida, sent to him, but they didn't have enough lift to bring all the soldiers in one lift. So he got one group led by Captain Samuel Leslie, who would be the senior officer in late July of 1775, and he got a second group of soldiers in October, mid to late October, and he only had 175 men. All the other individuals that Dunmore had to field were loyalists that he recruited out of essentially the Scottish merchant population in the city of Norfolk or the borough of Norfolk, and enslaved individuals that he could entice to leave their plantations and seek freedom with him, but only if they served for the crown. They had to be soldiers for the crown first. So this is the force that he built, and this is a force that would fight at Great Bridge. But the path to Great Bridge is not a simple one. Um, as the Patriot troops are organizing, you know, Dunmore is also in the field. He raids at Kemp's Landing in October and seizes two individuals. One is a member of the 3rd Virginia Convention from Princess Anne County, and his name is William Robinson. And he seizes a company commander of the Minute Unit, the Princess Anne District Minute Unit that's forming there at Kemp's Landing. Now, Kemp's Landing is it's now just a crossroads in the city of Virginia Beach, but it was a community of about 90 buildings, warehouses, and businesses at the terminus of the eastern branch of the Elizabeth River in what's now the Kempsville section of the city of Virginia Beach. It would be the second largest community south of the James River. Because remember, all people are living this basically this plantation style life, and there aren't a lot of small communities. Another place that becomes important is the Great Bridge, which is a community of about 30 structures right along a causeway that connects the southern where the southern branch of the Elizabeth River terminates, and it begins really with a swampy terrain which drains into the Albemarle Sound of North Carolina. It's just a little piece of high ground that has some islands on it, which in the late 1600s, early 1700s was connected with a causeway. And it's the road that leads down to North Carolina and also then out west around the northern edge of the Great Dismal Swamp. So Great Bridge becomes a very important geographic point that is very difficult physically to cross because it's a series of small islands connected by causeways. Most people don't realize it. You get down there today, you can see some of this, but not all of it. Well, Dunmore's driven out of Virginia or out of Williamsburg on the 8th of June after the gunpowder incident when he seized the gunpowder 2 days after Lexington and Concord. He's eventually forced to leave. He goes aboard British warships and eventually ends up down in Norfolk Harbor because of the large Loyalist and Scottish population there. The mercantile system is based out of Virginia, is really based out of Norfolk. Norfolk is the 8th largest city in North America and home to over 6,000 people at the time. And it's the largest city in Virginia. There are two other large locations of people in Virginia that aren't considered boroughs or cities even. The only city is Williamsburg with about 2,000 people. But Fredericksburg and Alexandria have populations of about 3,000 at this point. The rest of the 600,000 Virginians, white and black, are all spread over across the state, which extends all the way up to the Ohio River line in what's now the state of West Virginia, and even west across the Appalachians into Kentucky. But the Virginians actually claim all of what would become the Northwest Territory. They claim Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and parts of Minnesota. And so that's how they view the world. And they're very land hungry. So Western Virginia is populated densely at this point, surprisingly, all the way, into the Shenandoah Valley and even beyond. Virginians occupy Pittsburgh, Fort Pitt, because Pennsylvania really had no militia system at the time, and they they claim that corner of Pennsylvania that's now southwestern Pennsylvania. So it's a much different geographic site than what we have. So those 16 districts, the men were from all over Virginia that would man up these units that would fight at Great Bridge. So that's a little bit of background. Now, what happened was William Woodford was instructed on the 24th of October to take 6 companies of his 7 of the 2nd Virginia Regiment and 5 companies of the reorganized Culpeper Minute Battalion to man them out to full strength and man them up with full equipment, because not everybody had weapons. There's a big weapons shortage. So they had to build these units with what resources and people they had. So he takes that 11 company task force, and his mission is to cross the James River at Jamestown, which is about 2 miles wide, and being patrolled by a British sloop of war and its associated tenders, the Kingfisher. Um, he is successful in crossing, but before that even happens, a crisis occurs down at Hampton. And I won't go into too much depth, but basically, there are 3 companies defending Hampton. Uh, the captain of the sloop of war Otter, Captain Squire, has had one of his tenders grounded, burned to the waterline by the Patriots, his men held and eventually released, but no apologies from the Patriots from this. So eventually, the War of Words, which results in Dunmore seizing the only printing press in the borough of Norfolk, run by John Hunter Holt, the Norfolk Intelligencer, which would have been the 4th newspaper in Virginia. There's 3 additional that are printing in Williamsburg. But he seizes his press and takes it aboard his ship and begins printing a counter narrative to the Patriot narratives in the Virginia Gazettes in Williamsburg. Um, Squire then will take his small contingent, his sloop of war, and 4 of tenders, and attempt to enter the Hampton Harbor. They're repulsed on day 1, which is the 26th of October, 1775. But on day 2, they're successful in entering the harbor. And that previous evening, William Woodford and Captain Abraham Buford of the Culpeper Minute Battalion formed a 50-man volunteer company in Williamsburg. They borrowed horses from the citizens of Williamsburg and wagons and rode all night in the rain, arriving down at Hampton about 7:30 in the morning. About 8 o'clock is when the British sloops or the British tenders broke through and began the attack. Buford's riflemen and the other 3 companies were able to hold them off. They didn't damage the town. There were no casualties, and they actually captured one of the tenders and seized it. And there was about a dozen killed, wounded, captured for the British. So this is the first blood that's drawn in Virginia soil. So now everybody's hot. This is it. The war has actually started. Blood has been shed. As Woodford is attempting to cross the James River, Dunmore is not inactive. He goes back to Kemp's Landing, and well, he goes to Great Bridge because he believes that there are militia units forming at Great Bridge, and he understands how critical that pass is. He gets down to Great Bridge, and there's nobody there. He decides to build a fort at the north end of the Great Bridge. It's called Fort Murray. The Patriots will name it the hog pen because it's in a low, swampy ground, and it probably was pretty nasty to be in it. But he builds this, he orders this built, and then he marches up Kempsville Road. Somewhere just south of town, the Patriots attempt to spring an ambush. It fails. You have the British Grenadiers leading this attack. Um, the Patriots probably fire too soon, are very, probably have no muskets. We don't know a lot about the details, but you can fill it in based on what we know about the situation at the time. Um, the Grenadiers would have done exactly what Grenadiers are trained to do. They would have turned directly into that fire and assaulted with fixed bayonets. In the dense wood line, Patriots broke, ran. Several men reportedly drowned crossing the Elizabeth River because it's right near the branch of the Elizabeth River. Um, we know at least the name of at least one soldier who was killed there. His name is John Atkiss. He was 19 years old. Can talk about him in a little bit more detail, but the two colonels that were in command of the Princess Anne District unit. Now, this is a district minute unit, it is not Princess Anne County militia. There could have been standard militiamen there, but this was actually the Princess Anne District Minute Battalion. And both colonels ended up getting captured. Uh, and so now what you've done is neutralized that unit at the skirmish at Kemp's Landing. It sets
Was that
Dunmore up. Go ahead.
was that one soldier who died? Is that the first known casualty on the of a Virginian during the war?
It is. It is the first known. His name is John Atkiss, and like I say, he's 19 years old. I correspond with his family members today. He did not have any children, but his father did, and had other children, and so he had siblings, and all the folks that I know are descended from that branch of the family. So it's pretty interesting to tie this all together to today. And those individuals hopefully will be at the 250th commemoration of the skirmish at Kemp's Landing, which we're going to hold at City View Park in Virginia Beach on the 15th of November of this year. Actually, 215 years to the 50 years to the day after the event. So we're looking forward to that. And that'll be an SAR ceremony on Saturday at noon, but there'll be a reenactment by the 7th Virginia Regiment and British, the British company as well, the Crown Company. So we'll have a good skirmish for the folks that show up to see that right there in Virginia Beach on the same road that Dunmore would have walked up on that
Yeah.
same day. Yeah, it won't be in the exact location, but it'll be as close as we can get, given that we're in the middle of the city today. So, but yeah, that's what happened at Kemp's Landing. So Whitford is attuned to all this. He knows what's going on. He gets word on Kemp's Landing, and he knows he's got to get down there quickly. So this is where I think I want to flip to the maps, Mark, if we could, and give you a sense of what's going on. Do you have any specific questions for me at this point?
No, I think in that small engagement at Kemp's Landing, obviously, we've had Mike Cessair, who's also with the Seventh Virginia, talk about how that preempts their Dunmore's Emancipation Proclamation that he does, which of course is trying to galvanize slaves to come, or at least slaves of rebel masters to come join him and help. Which is really interesting because, as you were mentioning, he has so few actual, regular soldiers with him. So it's kind of necessary to build up uh, his loyalist base.
Yeah, that's what he's got to do. He's got to recruit, and he knows this. He's got to recruit, and so this I think this graphic really helps you visualize the situation that he faces. Um, so what you're looking at now is a modern NOAA map, and what we've simply done is put an additional 5 feet of water on that NOAA map in an attempt to recreate the marshes and swamps that would have existed at the time of the American Revolution. So, today we have drained the swamp, literally. Um, we have canals, we have ditches, we have dams, we have lakes, we have all kinds of things that we've tried to alter the landscape. We have modern highways, bridges, and tunnels that kind of hide all this. And so this is an attempt to show what they would have had to deal with in 1775 without any of that modern infrastructure. So what you can clearly see is, 90% of Princess Anne County, which is to the right or the east of this line, and the most densely populated portion of Norfolk County, which is up in here, lies north of the Great Bridge. And the Great Bridge is today the Great Bridge section of Chesapeake. And of course, this portion down below and to the west, this would be where Portsmouth is. And this is much of the city of Chesapeake today. And then, of course, North Carolina is just below. So the bulk of the population, we estimate that there's about 20,000 people that are living in this general area right here. Um, the entire district from which the Princess Anne district, Minute District was created also included Nasman County, which is now this portion here, which is the city of Suffolk, and Isle of Wight County, which is out here further to the west. Those were the counties, and the population of those counties was probably somewhere in the 35, 37, 40,000 individual range. And that's both white and black. That's total population. So this is extrapolated from doing a lot of research on population in Virginia and understanding that they would have created these minute districts with approximately the same numbers of people. They would not have been greatly varied. They understood who lived where. So this is important because this is the only way you can control this area is by land is to get across this great bridge right here. Um, the, the the Patriots do not have control of the water. The British Navy rules the waterways, and Dunmore has supplemented those British naval ships that he receives. And there are always two or three, sometimes four, that rotate in and out. Now, it's hard to track the movement of a lot of these naval vessels. But during the Great Bridge Campaign, he has two sloops of war, which are perfectly suited to operate in these shallow rivers and bays, as well as go out into the Atlantic Ocean through the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. So he's well set up because they have tenders that support them, which are much shallower draft ships that can go much closer to the shore. So the Patriots don't have anything that can compete with that. They have a few privateers. They're trying to man up some vessels. They really don't have anything to compete with these 16-gun sloops of war that Dunmore has at his disposal, and the additional ships that he's manning and building as his authority as the commander of the colonial navy in Virginia. So this is an important point. So what we find at the Battle of Great Bridge is the only Princess Anne District soldiers that show up at the Battle of Great Bridge all live south and west of Great Bridge. Now, the second piece of this is the route that they had to take to get to Norfolk. So you can see, a drive today from the vicinity of Norfolk up to Williamsburg using our modern highway system. You can do it in about an hour if the tunnel's not backed up. You know, not going to do that if you don't control the water. You know, this trip for George Washington in 1781 out here to the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, where the British warships were anchored in 1781 for the meeting of the three commanders. Washington was gone for 3.5 or 4 days. because the
Mhm.
weather was bad, and that was by ship. You know, a French ship is what took him out there, and when the weather turned bad, they couldn't get back. So even if you control the water, you don't control the weather. Um, Now, this trip from Williamsburg across the James River, a portion of that crossing occurred around the Jamestown area, but they would have the rest of the crossing, the latter parts of that crossing, they had to go all the way up to Sandy Point in what's now Charles City County, where the river is a lot narrower. And they don't even show this on this 1781 Yorktown map. It's too far upstream. But this is a route that the Patriots had to follow. They assembled at Cobham, which was a plantation which would be now in the vicinity of the Scotland Jamestown ferry crossing on the south side of the James River around what we call Scotland today, uh, in Surrey County, just north of Surrey. And then they would have gone down to Smithfield and down to Suffolk. They would have gone down around the northern edge of the Great Dismal Swamp and then into Great Bridge on what would today be Cedar Road from the west. At Great Bridge, they still had to then go up to Kemp's Landing because they didn't control the water. The British controlled this waterway here. And then they would have gone into Norfolk. This is about 110 miles. This is not not a route that you're going to take, you know, in a leisurely walk. This took several days for them to make this move. The first forces showed up at Great Bridge on November 28th, and they were under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Charles Scott, and Major Thomas Marshall. Scott was the lieutenant colonel of the 2nd Virginia Regiment, so he would have been Woodford's executive officer as terms of today's language. And Major Marshall was the same role. He would have been the executive officer, the major of the Culpeper Minute Battalion. And so it was a combined force of riflemen and musketmen that came into Great Bridge on the 28th. That's when the first Patriot casualty occurred at Great Bridge. We know the man's name. His name was Corporal Davis. He was from Richard Parker's company from the Lancaster District, a regular company of the 2nd Virginia Regiment. Um, so that's the very first casualty that the Patriots suffer at Great Bridge. What will happen is when he gets to Great Bridge, what you see is basically this. From the south looking north, and British build a fort on the other side. This is that Fort Murray, or the hog pen. And it would have sat probably 70 yards or so north of the end of the bridge. So the Patriots round up all the boats that they can find on the south end of the Great Bridge and then attempt to cross the bridge. And that's probably when Corporal Davis is killed. They realize that they just can't do a direct assault across that bridge. It's going to be too costly. The British have good defenses over there. And so they start digging in. They'll dig in at that south end of the bridge. Woodford will then, when he's at Suffolk on the 26th of November, he'll call for 100 volunteers from the Princess Anne District Minute Battalion. So the men that show up from the local area to augment this force of the 2nd Virginia and the Culpeper Minute Battalion will be just a handful of men that live south and west of Great Bridge. And so this is a modern view, a photograph of split photograph here. The bottom shows somewhat of a close-up of the bridge, but the top shows how that's all marshland and sawgrass that's out there, marsh grass. And so this is what it would have looked like originally. Now today, when you go up to the bridge, you see something quite different because there's probably 7 to 10 feet of fill around where the modern day Great Bridge is located. And it actually covers it's just south of what you're looking at here. And that's where the Albemarle and Chesapeake Canal goes through. And that was dug in the 1850s and probably crosses right about where the defensive position was. But this is what they would have been looking at. And you can see this copse of trees right here close to the road. It's right here. This is probably where Fort Murray was located, we believe. So you can see the original bridge would have been just about in the same location. And I think it was about 60 yards long, if I remember correctly. So it was a fairly substantial wooden structure that crossed the river at that point. But it was connected by causeways. And this, I think, is probably one of the better depictions of what we can describe. Now, this is not to scale. So when you look at it and you try to figure out what the distances were, it's a bit deceiving. But it's an original hand-drawn map. It was drawn by the British. We don't know exactly who drew it, but Captain Leslie was the senior man, so we'll credit it to Captain Leslie. And it shows what it looked like back then. What's most important, I think, are the engagement distances. Now, the British in Fort Murray on the morning of December 9th, 1775, had about 500 soldiers. Probably 250 or close to that were Ethiopians. Those were those formerly enslaved individuals that had left their plantations, at the really the risk of death, and joined Dunmore. The other 250 were a combination of his British regulars and white loyalist militia, mostly Scotsmen out of Norfolk, and they had been organized into companies. The plan, and let me back up a little bit. The reason Dunmore ordered an attack on the 9th was because he had received reports that there were reinforcements coming from North Carolina, and those reinforcements had cannons with them. And he knew that that small fort would never withstand the fire of those cannons. So he, probably based on his good judgment, and he decided, well, this is our one chance before those cannons show up to do a direct assault across that bridge and break that Patriot defense. They crumbled at Kemp's Landing. When they see our grenadiers with those fixed bayonets marching across that bridge, they're going to turn and run. At least that's what he hoped. It didn't happen. He had ordered Captain Leslie to take 2 companies of the Ethiopians and have them cross the river and do a flank attack or a rear attack into the Patriot defenses. And those would have been down here in the south. This is where the base camp was for the Patriots. They would have been, the Patriots would have been camped all along in this area at this road junction. There was a church there and a small cemetery. The attack never happened. And if you think about the complexity of what he had just asked a group of newly recruited, probably very poorly trained, and probably not really properly led soldiers to do, was something that would be next to impossible for a highly skilled, highly trained, and disciplined unit to do today. So the attack never happened, and it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that it didn't happen. That whole river line was defended. They probably would have had to move to the left of this screen, probably to the west, at least 4 or 5 miles to where there was a proper place that you could cross, and it was probably still defended by the Patriots because it had been defended, for the 2 weeks prior. So that part of the plan did not happen. So what did happen was 120 of the British regulars, led by the Grenadier Company, formed outside of Fort Murray. Just as the sun came up, the Loyalist militia came out and replaced the planks on the bridge that had been pulled up to prevent an assault across the bridge by the Patriots. They laid those planks back down, At that time, there were several sentries at the very southern end of the bridge. One of those men we determined was William Billy Flora. Flora was a free African man who would later open up a business and a livery stable and transportation business in Portsmouth. He was indentured at the age of 8 because his mother was white and his father was black. And so that was a form of, his mother had passed away. So that was a form of giving him some opportunity to learn skills in a trade and become a productive individual. That's how society viewed it at the time. Almost like foster care today, really, when they had no such thing back at the time. And so he was obviously raised by a patriot family and had strong patriot tendencies. We believe he was a Minuteman because he says he was a volunteer, or we determined that he was a volunteer, and he would later volunteer and enlist into the 15th Virginia Regiment. So we believe he spent his first year of service as a Minuteman in a Princess Anne District company operating in and around Great Bridge and Portsmouth, which would have been his home territory. At any rate, there were several sentries out there. It's reported that the one sentry, he's unnamed at the time, but we know it was Flora, stayed there and fired 8 rounds. At that point, the British started coming across the bridge. And if you notice at the bridge, there's a small island here. It's called South Island. So that would have been probably somewhere short of 200 yards. And then this additional causeway section, which looks much shorter here, would have been probably around the same length, about 200 yards, making it about a quarter mile from Fort Murray all the way here to the Patriot defenses. So the British then had to march across the bridge, form, and march all the way down there. Excuse me, I need to get a drink. So as the Grenadiers came across the bridge, they would have come under rifle fire from the Culpeper Minutemen, who were here on the west or the Patriot left, would have been the British right. These measurements were taken with rangefinders from known points that we can still determine today. And as you can see, it's about 160 yards to the midway point. So the maximum effective range of those rifles was going to be in the neighborhood of 250 yards. So basically, from the time the British come across the bridge, and some of these homes we know and buildings were already burned to the ground. They had been burned earlier to open up fields of fire. But they're going to come under rifle fire from the minute they cross the bridge. So this is where the employment of the Culpeper Battalion and the fact that they have rifles becomes critical. So they continue to fire into the flank of the British column until they reach about 50 yards from the main earthworks. Now, we believe that morning that there were elements of William Pickett's company of the Culpeper Minute Battalion that were manning these trenches over here. We have one pension application from a man in Pickett's company that says, I was there that morning. So it's a good indication it was Pickett's company. You probably wouldn't be mixing and matching companies. We know at the earthworks on the road was Captain or Lieutenant Travis, Edward Travis, from Captain Richard Kidder Meade's company. Now, Meade's an interesting guy. He would later become one of the 32 men who would serve as aides de camp to General George Washington. And so he's an interesting guy. He's left us some records of what happened. Those 25 men there would probably have been augmented by other individuals as well as the Culpeper men once the firing became general. We know that at one point men started to run down and take positions in the earthworks. So the numbers of rounds that are coming at the British as they come across here, led by Captain Charles Fordyce, who was the commander of the Grenadier Company, would have been increasing. And so they're exposed for, at least 350, 400 yards of fire across this bridge. Fordyce will lead them up to within 15 paces of the Patriot earthworks, and he'll fall dead. He'll have between 10 and 15 rounds in him. We believe that the men that were firing muskets, Meade and Travis's men, and the men that joined them, were probably firing buck and ball because of the description of the wounds that were received. So that attack falters, and as the men start to fall back, they're still under that rifle fire from the Culpeper unit. And that is pretty much the actual physical attack that takes place at Great Bridge. I know I've been talking a lot, Mark. You haven't asked any questions.
Now, this is really interesting because, often you hear Great Bridge and you just think that it's just a bridge. But as you see with the map here, that there's these, as you were mentioning earlier, these different causeways that they're, and just the length of it is really interesting. And I guess the British attack, they're forced to do this attack because of the causeway and just like a column formation. And is their attempt to try and get up to those earthworks with a bayonet? Is that their ultimate goal?
Well, if you go back and you look at that previous those previous slides, there's nowhere to go. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot get off of that causeway. This is what it looks like on the sides of the causeway. Today we go down there and there's a little bit of land around, right? But that's all been filled and modified. So they have, once they get onto this very southern end, which we believe is probably around 190 yards, this section right here. It doesn't look like that on this map because this isn't drawn to scale. This is just hand drawn. But we believe
Mm-hmm.
this section's about 190 yards. We believe the British had several cannon crews, and they did not have any British artillery. He had no artillery, Royal Artillery units. But what he did was he pulled the 4-pounders off of those warships that he had, and he used the Marine and Navy crews to man those guns. And Cornwallis will do the same thing at Yorktown. Some of those batteries at Yorktown are manned by naval personnel. So this isn't unusual for the British to do this. Um, and we believe those two 4-pound guns were probably positioned just to the west side, right here on the southern end of South Island. And they would have then been able to range both the Culpeper positions and Meade's men here along the road. And those 4-pounders would have had the ability to fire all the way along this road, because this ground gradually rises, not much, but it's a gradual rise back here to the south to the intersection of what's now uh, Cedar Road, and where the Patriots were encamped. So those men that were actually coming down to reinforce the firing positions were under fire of those cannons. And that's not often, addressed by anybody. And you'll get a mention of it from some sources. But the fact that the Patriots suffer one man wounded in the hand during this attack is absolutely amazing. Um, and we believe that was a man by the name of Nash, Thomas Nash, who was a member of the gentry, and he would have probably considered himself an officer of militia and showed up because he lived south of Great Bridge, and so people could get there. He was on the Committee of Safety for Norfolk County before this event. When we have records from the Committee of Safety meeting in the spring and summer of 1775. So he's a known quantity, and he's the man that left us the record of William Billy Flora. being
Mm.
the man that was at the bridge. None of this is in primary source information. It's all from secondary sources, but the pieces all fit together. And this is the best story we've been able to come up with. So this is absolutely amazing. Now, what happens to the British is that original assault column has 120 men in it. We believe there are 60 to 62 killed, wounded, captured out of that 120-man force. That will be 1/3 of Dunmore's regulars that are in Virginia at the time. Um,
Mhm.
the reinforcement that Leslie had was to form up those additional Ethiopians and Queen's Loyal Virginia Regiment soldiers, militia soldiers, and then they would follow in trace of that main column. They never crossed the bridge. They saw what happened to these guys as they moved across there. They got shot up. Leslie could not get them to cross the bridge. Um, so as the British soldiers fall back, again, half of them killed, wounded, captured, um, probably in shock at this point. Edward Stevens, who's the lieutenant colonel of the Culpeper detachment, will form up his men, and along the west side or the left side of this causeway, he'll move down and move into the South Island and move within rifle range of Fort Murray, and he'll drive the rest of those defenders back inside the fort. They were not able to retrieve these guns, and they had to spike them and leave them down at the south end of the South Island. So that's kind of how the immediate fight ends at Great Bridge.
And this combat only lasted about half hour in total.
That's the um, that's the estimate that it was only about a 30-minute fight from the time the Grenadiers crossed that bridge to the time they were driven back across. It was only about 30 minutes, but
And
it would have been a brutal
would
30 minutes.
yeah, for sure. I mean, just the description, like you said, of Fordyce with all those. I mean, it gives you a sense of how much musket balls are probably flying through the air, and yeah, I really appreciate the range finding because it gives you a sense of under how much fire they'd be coming from all over. And
I have to
and
credit my friends down at the Great Bridge Battlefield for doing this. This is something we just did within the last month, uh, trying to figure this
great.
out, looking at the original documents. And so uh, John Stahl, who is the senior docent down there, is a good friend of mine, another retired Marine, and he and some of his team actually went out with a rangefinder and did this. So kudos to them. This is good stuff.
No, yeah, like I said, it kind of gives you a sense of exactly what you can tell why they positioned their defensive positions like that. Because and and so Woodford is he on site during the battle, and is Dunmore on site during the battle? Do we know if both of them are there?
Yeah, so no, Dunmore is not on site. He sends Captain Samuel Leslie to lead the attack, who is his senior officer in the 14th Regiment. And he's the senior British commander in Virginia.
Yeah.
He is on site. He sends Captain Fordyce across, who was killed. Um, but there are several other officers who were killed. One of them is Lieutenant Leslie, who is his nephew.
Mm.
He dies here. So this is very personal for Leslie as well as everybody else. This is devastating for the British forces here, and so I'm sure there's a lot of loss of trust in Dunmore as a result of this, and it's difficult to know exactly what was known and what was stated, but I tend to believe that Dunmore knew how dangerous this was. He was a good soldier. He was a smart guy, and this was his last hope of holding Great Bridge, because if he feared if those cannon came up, this was the end. Now, the irony of this whole thing is the cannon came up, they were honeycombed, and they were worthless. There was no powder for them. But reportedly, several days before the fight, Woodford got word from the the, um, the contingent was coming up from North Carolina. Um, it was led by the commander of the Edenton Minute District. His name escapes me at the moment. I don't have it written down, but when the cannon came up, he looked at him and he said, "These are more worthless." I'll paraphrase what he said. "These are more worthless than the cannons that are mounted in the ground as decorations on the street in Williamsburg." But Dunmore didn't
Yeah.
know that. Nobody knew that. We don't know exactly what day the cannon got there. They may have come the day before the battle. They may have showed up on the day of the battle or even a day after the battle. It's difficult to say. The personnel report that Woodford will sign on the 10th of December says there were 180 North Carolina volunteers there on the 10th, but I think they kind of trickled in over the 7th, 8th, 9th, maybe even on the 10th. Now, what will happen immediately after this is Colonel Robert Howell's 2nd North Carolina will show up on the 12th of December. He'll have over 100 or 450 men with him. That unit will then take the lead, and Howell will become the senior commander of this operation as they move into Norfolk. Howe is a Continental officer because he's already been taken into Continental service by the Continental Congress. The Virginia troops haven't. So Howe outranks Woodford. But they sort of had a joint command after this. Woodford will also receive 3 companies from Patrick Henry's 1st Virginia Regiment. So he receives 13 extra companies 2 days after the battle, 3 days after the battle. And so by the 1st of January, the last several companies will arrive on the 1st of January. There'll be about 30 companies involved in the operations in Norfolk, which will eventually lead to the destruction of Norfolk and the burning of the entire city to the ground by early
Mm-hmm.
February. Patriots will then garrison Great Bridge, Kemp's Landing, and move the bulk of their forces out to Suffolk beyond the range of any British Navy forces that might come in to try to cut them off in Norfolk and Princess Anne counties. So if you go back to this slide, it made a whole lot more sense to be out west out there in Suffolk because you see how many different routes there are in the water to cut off this position here at Chesapeake. And they knew this was
Mm-hmm.
dangerous to try to hold Norfolk. That's why they burned it to the ground. And so there'll be a stalemate until May. The Patriots start to get some guns, large guns mounted on the entrance to the Elizabeth River. Uh, Dunmore will be holed up here just across Norfolk with a small foothold at what's today the Norfolk Naval Hospital, was then called Tucker's Point. Today we call it Hospital Point in Norfolk. Um, he'll end up having to leave there in May and go up to Gwen's Island. That occupation will last about 6 weeks until the Patriots get enough cannon mounted to drive him off of Gwen's Island, and then he will leave the Chesapeake Bay, never to come back to Virginia. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
liberates, that's kind of concludes the campaign, and that liberates Virginia from royal colonial governance. Now, Virginia doesn't have that internal security problem. They can handle that with their militia. They can suppress the loyalists that are still around with militia. And now they can send those eventually 15 numbered regiments and an assortment of other units that they form to support Washington's army. My proof in the pudding of this is that if you look at the force list when Washington crossed the Delaware in
Mm-hmm.
December 25th of 76, 20% of the forces that were with him were Virginians. Without them, he's not going to make that crossing. And every one of those units that was supporting Washington and on that campaign, the Trenton campaign, were involved in ejecting Dunmore from Virginia that summer.
Yeah.
So when he finally left, so I think it's much more critical what happens here to the general revolution um, than what most people would actually like to admit. You know, there weren't tremendous numbers of Virginia units in the North yet, but there were enough to make a difference. And that's my summary of Great Bridge for you right now.
Yeah, that's and you're absolutely right that, and that's how I view this whole, as you say, 15-month campaign of various things of pushing Dunmore out is so significant to free up those continentals that will eventually, you know, be critical for the overall revolution. I think Woodford described this Battle of Great Bridge as Bunker Hill of the South. Do you think that's a apt comparison there?
Yeah, to paraphrase him, he said it was a, a, a bunker hill in miniature, only we only had one man wounded in the hand
Yeah, and held the ground. I think he
and
mentioned
held the
too.
ground. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah. And not only did they hold the ground, you know, they forced Dunmore back aboard ship. And
Mhm.
once that was done, you know, they lost their foothold. And that was critical. Then they lost Norfolk. And the whole story of the burning of Norfolk, again, is another presentation that would be more than happy to do. But in my assessment of studying this, it was absolutely necessary to destroy Norfolk. It's the same problem that the Patriots will have with New York and Charleston. You know, they try to hold it, but they're just not capable of doing it. And the implications of burning a city to the ground are fairly significant. But,
Mhm.
you know, the fact that Norfolk was burned um, really set the precedence. But when you study the whole background of it, you know, Dunmore takes the blame for this. And there's
Mhm.
still textbooks out there that say Dunmore burned Norfolk. And a lot of people think he did. Well, he burned 4%, I believe, or 5% of Norfolk. The Patriots burned the rest. But again, the story to get there is very interesting. So be more than happy to tell that for you at some point in the future.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be really fascinating to go in depth about that, and yeah, and we just briefly mentioned it, but the whole Gwynn's Island aspect of the campaign too, I think is really interesting. So we might have to have you come back on and talk with us about that. But we are coming up on the 250th of the Battle of Great Bridge. Can you tell us? You know, there is a great, yeah, the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways Association down there that has a great little museum, some monuments. There are different markers down there. What do you recommend people see if they come down to visit Great Bridge, and what kind of stuff do you think do you know that they're planning to do to commemorate the 250th of this battle?
So there'll be actually three different events. I think that we probably need to mention. The first one will be the reenactment for the skirmish at Kemp's Landing, which will be held at City View Park on Kempsville Road in Virginia Beach on the 15th and 16th. It's a Saturday and a Sunday of November. The 15th event will be the 250 years to the day after the skirmish at Kemp's Landing. Then on the 6th, I believe it's a Saturday of December, there'll be the commemoration and reenactment of the Battle of Great Bridge. Now, the commemoration will be right on the battlefield. That will be on Saturday at 11 o'clock. One of the special parts of that is we've identified a Nazman Indian who fought at Great Bridge on December 5th of December 9th, I'm sorry, or yeah, December 9th of 75. His name is James Bass, and we're going to do a dedication of a marker to him in the Nazman Nation um,
Oh,
on at that time. So that's going to be a plus for the 250 events. The reenactment actually occurs at Lock Park, which is on the west side of Great Bridge Boulevard. There's going to be limited parking, but we've got the city to open up some spots at Lock Park across the street, and a grassy lot just on the south end of the current Great Bridge bridge there on the boulevard. So we're good for people to come on down to that and then go over to the reenactment. And then on the morning of the 9th, the actual day of the event, there's going to be a nice battlefield walk there on the actual battlefield at Great Bridge. So people that are really hardy and into this, come on down and join us for that. We'll be out there, rain or shine, on the morning of the 9th. At the same time, the reveille would have been sounded, and the Patriots would have been getting up as the British were crossing that bridge. So those are the three that are coming up in the near term.
Very cool. And yeah, no, I know for most of us at Emerging Revolutionary War, we love being, yeah, in the place where it happened, on the anniversary. So I think that'd be a really neat event. I know a few of our guys are going to be trying to be down there for some of those events. So well, thank you, Patrick, for all your time. Thank you all for joining us this evening, and hope you all get a chance to get out there and check out some of these spots. And thank you again for joining us tonight, Patrick. And like I said, I hope we have you back real soon.
It's a pleasure to be here, and hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you very much.